Welcome to the War Ready podcast. Hey, if you feel unfocused, unanchored, or like something inside of you is slipping, if you feel like you're moving but not making any progress, busy but you're not effective, listen to me. You are not crazy. You're drifting. Hebrews 2:1 gives us a pretty straightforward warning. It says this, "For this reason we must pay close attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away." Masculinity is not the issue. Unanchored identity is the issue. Hey, before we dive into the teaching for today, I do want to acknowledge something that I feel like is important. There is going to be a shift on this channel, kind of a sharpening, a tightening of focus, and it's not happening by accident. I've been writing quite a bit lately, not just notes, not just ideas, not just journaling. I've actually started a book. And writing does something very powerful, I think especially for men. It forces clarity. It exposes inconsistencies, it reveals purpose, and it brings identity into focus. At least that's what the writing that I am doing has done. This is one of the reasons that I urge, honestly, I kind of demand that my clients that I mentor, that they write, that they journal, that they reflect, or at bare minimum, that they answer some growth-minded questions in emails with me. Not because I need the answers as much as I need you to find clarity. And that only comes sometimes when we're forced to articulate something that we're thinking and clarify that in words that we're willing to put on paper. And so for me, beginning this book that I'm calling Identity Crisis, probably something like the battle plan for men who refuse to retreat, it has brought everything together. It has kind of reminded me who I am, what my calling is, and laser focused my purpose. So that's going to focus the purpose of this channel, the mission of this channel. It has kind of brought into line everything that I do. My speaking, my mentoring, my teaching, my content, my calling, they all go together. So I should probably just live in that space. Because we as men, we don't just need motivation. We need formation. We need identity. We need a battle plan. We need something that we can look at and have clear direction. And right now, I feel like a lot of men need a way out of the drift and a way back into sonship, strength, and clarity. So if War Ready starts to feel different over the next few weeks, good. I want it to be more direct, more intentional, more strategic. And all of the reasons that I just listed are why. My thought is I don't want to just record episodes anymore. I want to build a movement for men who refuse to retreat. And today's message, the 5 signs that you're drifting, is a big part of the battle plan. So let's go to work. So this channel exists to help men reclaim the identity that God intended and become the man that God designed them to be. We're not talking about the cultural version of masculinity, often referred to as bravado. We're not talking about a soft masculinity that in a lot of ways the church has pushed for years. Not angry, not wounded masculinity. We're talking about biblical, grounded identity anchored in masculinity. A masculinity that is true to the man that God designed you to be. And today's topic is drift. I believe that drift is one of the silent killers of men. Not the big failure, not the big sin, not blowing up their lives with massive force. It's the drift. Every psychologist, every counselor, every pastor working with men will tell you the same thing. Men rarely fall suddenly. They drift slowly. Drift is progressive. It's subtle. And drift is massively dangerous. And Hebrews tells us that it's natural. Unless you intentionally anchor your life, drift is natural. But before we talk about the signs, we need to create kind of a working definition. This is super fun for me because this is drift from both a biblical and a psychological perspective. The working definition that we'll use is a subtle, progressive disconnect between a man and his identity, his values, his calling, and his spiritual grounding, caused by distraction, disconnection, emotional rumbling, and unresolved wounds. So the biblical foundation is Hebrews 2:1, lest we drift. The Greek word behind drift paints a picture of a boat slipping past the harbor because nobody tied it off. Not rebellion, simple neglect. Not defiance, just disconnection. Not attack, simple inattention. So here are some concepts of drift from a psychological perspective. Erickson talks about identity diffusion, where a man loses clarity about who he is as a person. The American Psychological Association Dictionary of Psychology uses the term avoidance coping, where men numb instead of confront. Higgins talks about self-discrepancy theory, the gap between the actual self and the identity self that creates emotional drift. And Hirschfeld calls this concept of when men can't see the compelling future, they lose direction, called future self-disconnect. And so we're not saying that men are weak necessarily, they're just ungrounded. Most men aren't rebellious, they're just disconnected. Most men are not lazy. They're simply identity displaced. Part of the source of my writing comes from my personal story. I resigned from full-time ministry for the first time in 2009. And when I left ministry, I didn't just leave a job, I left my identity. Because I had gotten to a place that I didn't know how to relate to God as a son. I only knew how to relate to God and the church as a pastor. I didn't know how to be just a guy. I had been in full-time ministry for so long that it had become intermingled with my identity, so I didn't even know how to serve God without serving in a full-time role. If you've never been there, that may sound really odd to you, but my entire spiritual life was wrapped up in performance, expectations, outcomes, the responsibility that I had maintaining my appearance and being a leader. So when I was no longer Pastor Floyd, I didn't know who I was. And I drifted further and further and further than I ever had. And I drifted further than I believed was even possible. Not because of some huge scandal. I didn't blow up my marriage. Not some massive sin. I literally just drifted internally. Aimless, numb, disconnected, pretty empty. And it messed me up pretty bad. And it messed me up for about 7 years. 7 years of trying to figure out who I was. 7 years of trying to earn what God had already given me. 7 years of feeling like a man without any direction. And every man listening to this knows exactly how that feels, at least to some degree, even if you think you're hiding it well. See, I didn't need new habits. I needed a new foundation. And that's why drift matters, because drift quickly becomes destruction. So I'm going to share with you 5 signs of a man who is drifting. These signs are found in psychological research and backed by scripture. Number 1, you lose clarity about who you are. A drifting man says things like, I just feel off. I don't know what's wrong with me lately. I'm just not myself. And a lot of times you recognize that you're not really present in the places that you are. Like, I'm here, but I'm not really here. According to Erickson's 1968 Foundational Research in Development Psychology and Identity Theory, this is classic identity diffusion. It's a loss of an internal clarity and direction. It's what the Bible says in James 1:8, a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. because your direction is tied to your identity. So when you lose your identity, you lose your sense of direction. And when you lose your sense of direction, you drift, just kind of mindlessly floating along. Sign number 2, you numb instead of engage. Scrolling, eating, not eating, addiction, sometimes chemical, sometimes otherwise. The propensity to at least view, if not pursue, strange flesh. Energy drinks, video games, noise, busyness. Whatever. Whatever your drug of choice is. The American Psychological Association calls this avoidance coping. For men, it's usually just the I'm fine mentality. How you doing? Oh, I'm fine. No, you're not. 2 Samuel 11:1 describes King David's drift when he just simply stayed home at the time when kings go out to war. Staying home wasn't the sin. That was just him avoiding. That was just his avoidance. But we know where staying home left. Avoidance is drift in disguise. The number 3 sign is you either shut down or blow up. And honestly, looking back, there were times that I did both, and my poor family didn't know which one it would be in the midst of that. Drift always shows up emotionally before it shows up morally. In his 2015 research, James Gross called this emotional dysregulation, often rooted in father wounds, trauma, or identity confusion, according to several other studies. The biblical parallel is this. In Genesis chapter 4, we see Cain, who doesn't have a good sense of his own identity, and that wrong sense of identity leads to the wrong emotions, which leads to the wrong actions. A drifting man can get quiet at times. A lot of times they just numb themselves. They get cold and distant, irritable, and all too often that man gets explosive. Because there's movement, they can sense movement, things are happening, but they don't sense any progress. The number 4 sign of drift is small compromises become your new normal. You tolerate what you once resisted or even despised. You justify what once repulsed you. You minimize what you once repented of. Tin Brussel and Messick called this ethical fading. You drift to the point that you stop noticing the drift. You get so far away from who you know you should be that you no longer notice who you become. Samson didn't all of a sudden fall with Delilah. His drift started chapters earlier with small compromises that weakened his identity. And the number 5 sign of drift is that you lose brotherhood and accountability. A 2023 Harvard study cited loneliness as the number 1 predictor of emotional decline in men. Loneliness, the number 1 predictor of emotional decline. In 2020, the Mayo Clinic study showed that isolation increases addiction vulnerability. The American Psychological Association in 2019 suggested that men without deep friendships are at highest risk for drift. There's 100 biblical foundations for this, but Proverbs 18:1 is probably my favorite. He who separates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out in dispute against all sound wisdom. Isolation starts as a choice, but then it warps your judgment, it accelerates the drift, and it puts a man in danger. If you identify with any one of these 5 signs, or any one of several more that you know, if you know you're drifting, if drift is the problem, there are solutions. It's just a 2-step process, really. The first thing that you have to do is you have to check the drift. You have to put the drift in check. You have to hit the brakes. This is the point of Hebrews 2:1. For this reason, we must pay closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away. Let this video serve as your wake-up call. You cannot correct what you refuse to confront. And then the second step, it takes a little longer and it's a little more involved. But you have to rebuild your identity. Your behavior has to come from your identity, not the other way around. We tend to look at our behavior and say, that's who we are. But your behavior should be an outflow of who you really are. You have to recognize that sonship comes before leadership. You're not capable or qualified to lead anyone well until you're following the Father well. And you have to have a solid foundation before formation can start. You have to have a solid foundation before you can start to build the man that you are supposed to be. Listen, I want you to hear this. This is quite probably the key to healthy identity. You do not have to work for God's love. You don't work for God's love. Your work should be from God's love. You don't earn your identity. You discover it. You receive it. You live it. You embody it. And that is where masculine formation really begins. Because here's the reality. God cannot love you any more than he already does. And he refuses to love you any less than he does right now. And when you accept that and begin to work from that position of a God who loves you more than you can possibly imagine, it begins to set your identity on the proper foundation. Listen, there's a good chance that this is speaking directly to many of you. And if it isn't resonating right now, unfortunately, one day it likely will. But if something in you feels a little off right now, if you feel unanchored, if you feel like the drift has begun, you are not weak. You are not broken. And you are not disqualified. You're simply drifting. And that can be corrected. The entire point of this channel is identity, formation, biblical masculinity, brotherhood, purpose, clarity, strength, sonship. And I've worked on building a framework that can help you end the drift and start to reclaim your identity. You can find out more, and there will be more coming in the days to come as I build out my website, wholisticmentorship.com. I'm going to have a bunch of free and really cheap resources for you there. It is also the place where you can sign up to have a conversation with me to see if there are deeper ways that I can help you. But here in War Ready, the things that we've talked about today, this is where the journey begins. Because masculinity isn't the crisis. Masculinity isn't the problem. Unfathered masculinity is. Men trying to act like men, or boys trying to act like men without being submitted to the Father. See, it's really more of an identity crisis than it is a masculinity crisis. And we can get anchored, we can get clear, we can get connected, and we can be formed. That new direction for you, it could start right now. And if you'll submit to that process, it will make you war ready. War!